Welcome to the Foster Friendly Podcast, where we come together to make a difference in the lives of children in foster care and the families who care for them. Foster Friendly communities are part of a nationwide movement by America's Kids Belong that helps people from all walks of life take action and help kids and families thrive. You'll hear from former foster youth, foster and adoptive parents, social workers, faith and business leaders, and other experts on how to engage in meaningful ways. Our hosts Brian, Travis, and Courtney explore inspiring stories of everyday people making a difference in foster care where they live and work.
Welcome to the Foster Friendly Podcast. I'm Courtney Williams, joined by my co-host, Travis Vongsness. And today, we're joined by a foster care caseworker who uses her knowledge of trauma to support foster parents and youth in care. Becca Bramley went to Fort Lewis College for psychology, then went on to get her master's degree in social work at the University of Denver. She's been a foster care caseworker for 3 years and is currently the therapeutic foster care program manager for La Plata County in Colorado. Welcome to the podcast, Becca.
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Well, tell us a little bit more about yourself, anything, maybe even hobbies, something maybe people wouldn't even know about Becca, and then more into your education and what led you into becoming involved in this profession.
Sure. Well, a little bit about my background. So kind of like Courtney mentioned, I went to Fort Lewis College and got my psychology degree. And I come from a family who struggles with substances and mental health. So it was definitely something that I was passionate about from the get-go. And then I graduated and I traveled around for a little bit. And then I decided that I wanted to go get my master's in social work. And I had no idea what I wanted to go into. The beauty of social work is it's such a broad umbrella. And so you can kind of choose which path you want to take, so to speak. Because for a while I thought about I wanted to go into counseling, but I wanted more of a, broad scope of kind of what I could go into. And so then that's the beauty of social work is you can, work in schools and be a social worker. And then I also can have this position of being a therapeutic foster care coordinator and work with families. And and I'm actually currently working towards getting certified as a synergetic play therapist. So I really love working with kids and just connecting with kids on a mind-body connection, because that can, and we'll talk about this, but so much of, trauma is a disconnect from the mind and the body. Mm-hmm. And so exploring that with kids and just having them create an awareness of having that connection with their mind and body. So that's a little bit about me on my education side. On my personal side, I live in Durango. I have a partner, and we have a German short-haired dog who we love dearly. We're pretty advocates. We're big skiers, runners, hikers. We love to do outdoorsy things. I mean, that's what drew us to the San Juans and living in Durango was the mountains. So we love living down in our little southwest town down here.
I love it. Very Colorado of you with all that stuff.
Yes, born and raised too, so never left.
Very cool. And I love too, it seems like a lot of social workers and caseworkers, sort of the inspiration to actually become, involved. It sounds like your story as well, of just something from the heart, something from the past that maybe was a pain point or something, to overcome, and then to really have compassion to that. So you're now a caseworker through a therapeutic foster program. Tell us a little bit more about therapeutic foster care and kind of the difference between that and then just general foster parenting.
Sure. So as Courtney mentioned, I have been in this field for going on 3 years, and I really didn't see myself being in child welfare. So I came in knowing nothing about foster care, child welfare. And then the first year that I started working here, La Plata County did just have general foster homes, and we were in the process of becoming a county that has therapeutic homes. And within the state of Colorado, I think we only have 3 as of now, but La Plata County was one of the first to have the therapeutic foster care program. So I would say we were kind of the guinea pigs of this program for sure. And I had the opportunity to take it, and so I did. And so general foster home is, it's not as intense of an intensive program as therapeutic. And it consists of monthly home visits for the caseworker coming in and checking in on the family and the kids, or the child and youth. And therapeutic foster care incorporates treatment for special physical, psychological, or emotional needs of a child and youth who's placed with a specially trained foster home. So the foster home that is a therapeutic home completes over 32 hours of training on how to best support a child with these high intensity needs. A lot of times, we see kids who are placed in therapeutic homes when they are placed in a residential home and they're being placed down into a therapeutic home, or when they are brought into foster care and their needs are really high, that they need to be placed in a higher level of care home. So that would be the therapeutic home versus a general foster home. And therapeutic foster care is provided through an integration of services with key interventions and support provided by therapeutic foster care providers. And we are trained and supervised by La Plata County Human Services and our other partners. We collaborate with our community and our team members, our partners, who provide support for the child and youth and their family. Reunification is always the goal that we have with our system. And ideally, for therapeutic home, the child is only in the home between 3 to 6 months. And then the clinician or a caseworker is seeing the family and kid on a biweekly basis to incorporate intervention plans, behavior trackers, and just overall support to the child and youth within those 3 to 6 months to create sustainability, longevity for the family. And then, depending on the case, because every case is different, the kid would either be reunified back in their home, and then as the therapeutic caseworker, I would then implement those interventions into the biological family's home and state, like, this has been working in the foster home. This is what's been going really well. This is how we've been able to regulate ourselves to mitigate any behavior that's coming up. So I would just, like I've said, it's very more hands-on and more intensive of an overall program.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I can say as a previous general foster home and now a therapeutic foster home, Becca's actually my caseworker, so I get to work with her closely. It is a difference, and it's almost, I never want to talk people out of becoming a therapeutic home, but it is almost a full-time job. I mean, there are a lot more expectations of the home, a lot more appointments and just things on your schedule. But the beauty of it, like Becca said, one thing I wish it was really necessary for all reunification plans is to have that coexisting plan where they're working with the birth families to make it, when they're reunified, we want to see that successful, right? So to give them those tools and those tips and those resources that often they don't get. And it's really sad to see.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I would say, the last piece too is, if you think about it, it is that in between a general foster home and residential. And so it is that kid is needing those services, those appointments, that hands-on attention from their team member, and the wraparound from La Plata County, from the other community partners, from their therapists, to really make them feel heard and loved, so that then they can start being able to process the healing that they went through. So speaking of what they've gone through, trauma has really become a buzzword since COVID. To be honest, I kind of get annoyed with it at times because I feel like it's overused. And with the overuse of the word trauma, we're kind of hearing it everywhere all of a sudden. I feel like it downplays situations that really are linked to trauma, especially when we're talking about childhood trauma. So experts categorize childhood trauma into 3 categories of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences:
And I've read that the average youth in care has experienced 4 to 5 of those ACEs. Can you, Becca, just tell us a little bit more about ACEs, what they are, and what you see in the youth in care?
So as you said, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, which are traumatic experiences a child endures during childhood. And this can be from 0 to 17 years old. These experiences can include violence, abuse, neglect, witnessing their loved ones or family experiencing some type of abuse, having a loved one attempt suicide, die. It can sexual abuse. It can be an array of anything, and really what trauma, means. And we talk about, I won't go into this too much, but from my school, it's the big T versus the little t, and like the big traumas versus the little trauma, but it's still, it affects the body and what the kid is going through, what anyone is going through. And that is when that mind-body connection becomes lost, because then when kids experience trauma, they go into that fight or flight. And so either they're fighting and their lid is flipped, or they go into that flight state, which is like a freeze, and they can't process anything about what's actually going on. And then being able to have that awareness within their body of like, oh, this is actually what I'm feeling. I'm feeling really scared right now, or I'm feeling really sad because XYZ is going on. So we see this a ton with our kids. Unfortunately, any kid who is within our system, they've experienced some type of trauma or ACEs, because they're in our system for a reason. Whether they experienced abuse or they witnessed their parents, or like I said, someone in their family who experienced it. And then it was due to them not being in a safe environment anymore, which is why then they have come into our care, which is foster care.
Well, kind of getting back to also to the sort of foster home versus, general foster home versus therapeutic. What do you look for in a general foster parent or incoming foster home that you'd consider good qualifications for becoming a therapeutic home?
Sure. The first thing I would always say is I'm always curious what brought them here. And just coming from a lens of curiosity. What are their intentions? Experience is an important piece. So for a general foster home, I would say that is the ultimate question of like being curious and what their intentions are. And then kind of from there, start building a foundation of their interest of becoming a general foster home. Then taking that next step of, what I would consider good qualifications of becoming a therapeutic home. That's where I would mention the experience piece. And like Courtney mentioned, her and Bobby, they have been foster parents for 17 years. And so to us, that was like, well, they have a lot of experience. And so I think that they would have a lot of value in becoming a therapeutic home. For families who are coming into foster care, I definitely ask the why behind it. And that's what I'm mentioning on my lens of curiosity. Because if they're here to adopt, I do try to direct them into another agency, because that's not the point of foster care. The point is to reunify with the families, and you create a home and a space to support the youth and their families, but then with the intention of, but I want you to go back to them if it's a safe and healthy environment for you. So then I would say for a therapeutic home, experience, kind of also looking into what their profession is, and if they have worked with kids at higher level needs, what qualifications they have, and ultimately hearing their stories. Where did they come from? What type of home did they grow up in? Because then that can also, that creates experience too. But I do, like within therapeutic, I do have a rule of thumb of being a general foster home at least for a year if they have no experience in foster care. So then they can just get their feet wet and really have the experience of, this is what it was like with a 5-year-old versus a 13 or 17-year-old. because no kid has the same behavior. Every kid has their own experience, their own journey, and they're going to have their own behavior around that. And it's none of it is going to be the same. And so having just the different types of experiences with youth and families, I think can bring a lot of value to foster families. Because some might like come in being like, yes, we want to be a general foster home. And then a therapeutic. And then after a year, they're like, no, I'm going to stay as just a general home, or I really want to provide respite for our foster families. So it also allows them a full year to kind of like sit in and simmer in what this actually is, because it can be a lot. Also, I've seen it in families and their relationships with one another and navigating that, and certain triggers that they thought they overcame, but then a kid comes at them in a certain point that like hits them, like that triggers them in a point. And then it's like, okay, now let's reflect on that, of why that's bothering you or whatever it might be. So that's where I feel like it's the important piece of at least being a foster parent for a year before really stepping into that higher level of being a therapeutic home. And then, like I had mentioned, it's more training hours. Therapeutic foster homes need 32 hours of training every year, compared to a general foster home needs 20. So it's 12 hours of additional training.
Oh.
Yeah, kind of on the same sense, Becca, I often talk to people, when I'm recruiting, if they're even interested in fostering, I encourage them to just start as a respite care provider, jump in that way, get your toes wet, understand the system, and then do the general, and kind of like that stepping stone, respite, then general, then therapeutic could even be a great path for people to just get to know the system and what really are your gifts and abilities for your family.
Totally.
Because we don't like to see kids bounce around, and that happens when people get in over their heads a little bit, and then kids are bounced around.
Yeah. And exactly, Courtney, that's like what I really want to try and avoid within our system, is the bouncing around piece, because it is so disruptive for kids' nervous systems. And their belief in who they are is like, I'm not in this family anymore, so now I'm going to be into this next family.
Yeah.
And that's the other piece that I want to point on, is like exploring their profession, because you can work with a foster family who is a teacher and works with kids within the school with higher intensive needs. And then it's like, do you actually want to come home to that as well? Because then that can be really exhausting. And so that is a great option of like, what about respite right now? Because I think a lot of people come in over their heads and thinking that they can do this, but then in reality, it is so hard emotionally. And you need to be able to have your foundation and like what your intentions are to be able to like stand your ground, because it can be very challenging.
And I think as we're going to talk more also about supporting foster families and how important that is, also too, as to your point, Becca, of mitigating some of the continued disrupted placements or whatever. And I think I've read too somewhere where like even starting a new school in a new home or whatever, 4 to 6 month academic loss, I mean, that's massive in educational impact as well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and then it's interesting also, as I've worked in this field now for years, you see trends in foster care in certain situations leading to placement. This is a national podcast, but even I see things in Colorado, and then I talk to my friends that live in Tennessee or South Dakota, and they say, oh, we're seeing the same things. So it feels like there's kind of these trends that move through. What are you kind of seeing right now as current trends and the needs in foster care?
Yeah, so I would say current trends that we see are a lot of families who have closed due to permanency or adoption, or when their home becomes too full. And so we are a small county, and so it is harder to get foster families. We're not bigger counties who have a lot of homes that are interested in being in foster care. So I would say that would definitely be a trend. We've actually seen quite a bit, which is interesting, of youth in conflict, which we haven't seen as much in the past, meaning that, and this is where we are in a need for foster homes, is for teenagers. because a lot of homes, you know, I think they come in and they have this idea of what foster care is. And in reality, it's not, you know, so they're like, I want to come in and I want to adopt this baby. And it's like, and that's where I'm almost like, you know, redirect them into an adoption agency, because that's not why, that shouldn't be the intention, is kind of how I try to redirect it. Because like I said, we have a need for homes for teenagers, because we have a lot of teenagers who have conflict with parents. And especially, I think we've seen this shift since COVID of just kind of that resistance that teenagers and kids have towards parents, and then parents feeling at a loss. And then unfortunately, I mean, not feeling supported by their community, by teachers, and kind of having this idea that they need to do it on their own. So then that is when, you know, youth in conflict rises, and then we get involved. So that's what I would say is, I mean, the need we're seeking is looking for providers just in general, and who are passionate with any age, but specifically there is a bigger need for teens and teenagers within our community, is what I've noticed.
Yeah. And I'd say that's for sure a national trend, a national need is homes for the older youth. I'd say 10 and above is often the hard to place kiddos, or the kids that get bounced around, like we were talking about, from home to home to home. Yeah.
Which, you know, it's almost, it's cliche, because kids who are bouncing around from home to home and their behaviors are so big and intense, they're trying to say something and they're trying to belong. And I that's the message I want to get across to everyone, is like, listen to those behaviors and not taking it personally. Rather, it's the kid trying to ask for something that they need that hasn't been met. And so they are expressing it through anger, through yelling, through crying, through whatever emotion it is. But we see it most commonly in anger and aggression. And kids can, especially like bigger kids, like they can be intimidating and scary, but it's actually really looking into what, you know, the other side of what's actually going on for this kid, because they're trying to express something and a need that they're needing, but they don't know how to do it.
Yeah, Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey wrote a book a few years ago now called What Happened to You? And I love that question. It's not like, what's wrong with this child? It's more, what happened to them? And how can I support them and see that need behind the behavior and understand that there's something there. Like you were just saying, there's something there, there's a reason. And we just need to get to the root of it and help them. And sometimes that's crying with them. Sometimes that's letting them be for a while. You know, people ask me, how do you do it? And how do you do it with kids in your home? That's what people are often scared of. Like you bring in these teenagers who have big emotions, but you already have kids in the home. And again, it's just educating our kids as well. And you know, these are often teens who are going through hard things, and we need to have that empathy and compassion to help them and support them and show them that they belong. They belong on this earth. They belong, you know, in a family. They belong to, they deserve love and compassion and empathy, and also just people to rally around them, because that's what they need is people.
Yep. And their community, and to feel that, I mean, exactly, Courtney, to feel that piece of just being vulnerable and safe, because they may have never known how to feel that.
Man. And just thinking too of how the aspect of, as you're talking about like the anger and just trying to process also like what's even happening. I just often think about I describe being in foster care as just a swirling uncertainty that just pervades everything in your day to day. It's like, what is the next outcome of even tomorrow? What is happening to me? If we know what it's like to just be teenagers, even if we had stable families, like prom, and just how like awkward and like anxiety ridden it can be, just like that. But then you're in someone else's home, not knowing if you're going to go to another school or, so I think even just like you're saying, coming back to just the compassion, like put yourself in their shoes, man, how would you even be relating to life? And so, but kind of speaking of that, I know, Becca, you have like unbelievable hard things daily in your team and just what you guys go through on the front lines. So I have to imagine you have to cling to the hope and inspiration of the stories, the faces, the kids that just keep you going in those moments. So do you have an inspirational story or two just that helps keep you going as an example?
Yeah. I mean, Travis, I laugh because you have to also, like, yes, I mean, I show up to work some days and I have no idea what I'm going to show up to. Some days it's like pretty chill. Other days it's like it's complete chaos and we're in a crisis situation all day. But you have to keep it light and you have to keep humor within it. And I think, that's the piece though, is like kids always will have humor. Kids, and that is where it's like just joking with a teenager and just kids, it's like, and being, kind of having that sarcastic humor with them will just lighten up things by so much.
Yeah.
And that's something I've really, cultivated in this job is like, okay, just keep it light. Like kids will say hurtful things to you and they will be mean. And that is, again, where you just have to kind of change that perspective and be like, and this is what you're feeling. And because then it's being projected onto me and how hard that must be that you're feeling this. So let me explore that with you. And so I would say just like the resiliency in kids and that I see every day, is definitely inspiring. Just what some of these kids have seen, have gone through, being, placed in home to home. And you're, as a caseworker, you're the consistent person in their lives for a long time. They're the ones that they know that they're going to most likely see you either bi-weekly or once a month. You're the ones, who are asking them if they feel safe in the home. And you really start to build that rapport and trust with kids, because you really need to make it known that you are on their team. And so I would say, that the resiliency that I witness in these kids is inspiring, and foster parents who continue to show up and support these children and youth and their families. But there have been so many different type of cases and families I've worked with, and they all have their own beautiful stories and experiences. But I would say one that comes to mind is, so this case was actually when I first started, and I'm still working with the family now. But when I first started, there was a group of siblings who, their age ranged from like 7 to 16, and there was 4 of them, 2 boys and 2 girls. And their mom had died of overdose, and they all had different dads who were not really in the picture. And so when their mom died, that was kind of all that they had. And they did have a grandma who was supporting them, but she was not in a place to be able to keep all of them, and just be due to her age and having 4 kids. And so we unfortunately we didn't have a home at the time who would take all 4 siblings, but we did have a couple who would be interested in taking the 2 younger ones, and then a single provider who wanted to take the 2 older kids. And so that's kind of where we left it, was the single provider having 2 teenagers, the couple having the younger, and then the family navigated the challenges, and they made it a priority to have the siblings keep a relationship and see each other. So they did weekly dinners with one another. They provided respite for one another, and they were all within Durango and Bayfield area. And so they really just wrapped around each other and supported each other so that these kids could still be siblings. Like, yes, due to the fact that they couldn't be living in the same home, they were still a family. And to this day, it still is. They actually all ended up being adopted, 2 of the teenagers by the single provider, and then the 2 younger ones by the couple. And they still have family dinners. They still see each other. They still all go to church. They definitely make it a priority that they're in each other's lives. And so that's like one of the many stories that are really inspiring, because it's like, the last thing we want to do is have to separate kids, especially siblings.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like how cool that the foster family made it a priority to keep them in each other's lives. And even though they weren't living in the same home, they were still siblings and they were still seeing each other on a weekly basis or more.
I love that.
So that to me is just the message of like, and to like, they continued to keep their grandma involved in their life. And if the teenagers wanted to go stay with their grandma or the youngest kids, they still could. And so then all of them just had this strong relationship with one another and became a family. Even though they weren't blood related, they were still a family.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
It's really powerful.
Yeah, well, as we kind of close out this episode, talk to me a little bit, Becca, about caseworker burnout. In fact, statistics show that in the child protection sector, 75% of social workers reported high levels of emotional exhaustion. I can imagine it's emotionally hard, a hard profession to be in, dealing with youth who are, youth in conflict, youth who have gone through some really hard things, and you're hearing those stories all the time. You're walking through those stories. How do you keep going? And do you have encouragement for other people in this field that are just entering or part of this field that are feeling that burnout?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to ignore that it is a very challenging profession. And we unfortunately do see quite a bit of turnover. Interesting enough, it's actually I read a study that it's between 18 to 24 months is when caseworkers start to have that turnover, and it's either they stay or they go. Because I would say after 2 years is kind of when you were like, okay, I somewhat know what I'm doing, and I am also in this, like I'm in the thick of it. So I would say ways in which I cope is seeking my own therapy, and I see my therapist on a biweekly basis. I continue to educate myself in how to best support youth with trauma. And really, like I said before, and really pay attention to their cues and the behaviors that they're demonstrating. Because I think that is the biggest thing. And I always remind myself, almost as a mantra, is keeping one foot in and one foot out. So meaning I stay present with the youth or family that I'm working with, and I'm intentional with them. However, I'm not becoming too consumed in it. And so that's kind of the like keeping one foot in, one foot out, where I'm there and I'm with them and I'm having that compassion and I'm having that empathy with them. However, I'm not letting it consume me and overpower me, because then that's where I really feel like the burnout starts to happen. And then I just continue to, I work on ways. I'm mindful about how I keep myself regulated. And so that then I can demonstrate co-regulation with the kid, because you are always needing to keep yourself regulated when you're with these kids. And, educate them and create an environment of how to be an external regulator. So I'm always being like, it's feeling like a lot right now. Or like I'm feeling like my body is just, my stomach is cringing or whatever it is. Or my heart is hurting, and placing my hand on my heart. Because then you really start to demonstrate to these kids, again, how to have that mind-body connection. Because it's ways just to bring them down a notch. And then the last thing I would say is just staying authentic and true to myself, constantly having the reflective awareness of, how am I demonstrating to this kid that I'm who I am. And like I said, like being silly with kids can be such a good rapport builder, and just lighten up the load on a lot of things, because sometimes kids just think they have to be so serious, or these things that they've gone through. And sometimes you just like need to laugh, need to like let off some steam a little bit, and then come back to it. And then they're in a place that they can actually like process with you. So yeah, I would say like I have all these tools and skills in my toolbox, so to speak. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And then I think, just like I mentioned before, the inspiring piece of working with child and youth, biological families, foster families, um, and what they're going through, and it's real, and it's life, and it's raw, and being able to create a space where you can show up and support them in any way that they need. I actually had someone mention this to me, and I always keep it with me, is it's like, what if I show up to a family and they want nothing to do with me? And she said, then ask them what they need. And if they tell you to go sit in the corner, then go sit in the corner, because that's what they need in that moment. And so sometimes that's just like, and especially with kids, it's like if you ask them what they need, sometimes they're not in the headspace to be able to tell you what they need. So then in that moment, it's like, all right, I'm just going to sit here with you. And then just sitting in silence, because then you're showing them that you're still here and you're still waiting to be with them. So I think that, and then just sharing it. There's a lot of things that keep me going. It is really hard work, and it can be exhausting. And also too, taking the time for yourself, checking in. And like I said, like having that reflective awareness, checking in with yourself and what you're needing. So if I did just work with a kiddo and we had a crisis, like afterwards being like, okay, like what do I need? Do I need to like go sit at the river for a second? Do I need to go eat a snack? Do I need to go get myself a tasty drink, whatever it might be, go be with my friends, my partner, my dog, like really being able to check in with myself so that then I can refill my cup and then be able to show up for the kid or family or whoever it is, fully present and fully there the next time I see them. And then the last thing I would just say is, continue to show up with compassion and empathy, and authenticity is so important, because kids can also, they can tell when you're lying and you're not being true. And if you're not, if you're just trying to be there and leave, like they can feel that. And so really being true to yourself and who you are, and silly with these kids, because I do believe that's how we can ultimately create safety, is through authenticity and congruency with these kids and these families.
Thanks for sharing all that. I hope that you stick with this for many more years personally, selfishly, because you really are a wonderful caseworker. And just, I'm sure everybody listening can tell that you're very authentic. You're very down to earth, and the kids, the youth, the families, we all love you. So
thanks, Brittany.
Well, I love what you just said too in the last segment, because I feel like the crossover to that, to just also the same advice for foster parents, spot on, because all of those things, those qualities for self-care, interacting through humor, being authentic, all these things are those very ways also that foster families need to engage the kids. And I often think of how many of the people drawn to caring for kids, there can be that sense that, in my compassion to give, that it almost seems selfish to give back to myself. Like I think that's a common feeling for a lot of people, that we need to kind of push back against and say, like, self-care isn't selfish care. And that in order to give back and have the oxygen to breathe, you have to put on the oxygen in order to, help. So that was really, I love that, both for, like you said, for other caseworkers, but also for foster families, foster parents. So as we close this finally out, Courtney and I just want to say thank you again for, just all that you do for children and families in Colorado. If you are a current foster parent, I think the message is, hey, let's consider, the needs. Also, how are you doing? Like, if, maybe you feel after listening to this episode, like, yeah, this makes me kind of more interested in becoming a therapeutic foster home, and maybe exploring that, knowing that if you're a foster family that also needs a break, man, there is no shame. In fact, you're helping the kids by stepping out for a season if you have to, or whatever. So yeah, look at that, explore that. I think also supporting foster families is another way, a huge way that's just as important as being a foster family. It's helping them stay in the game, helping them love the kids well. And I would say secondarily, it is also supporting the caseworkers because it's also helping fight back against the attrition of loss of foster families. So, which then makes things smoother and the relationships are ongoing and not more recruiting. And I mean, that's always going to be an issue. But so anyway, I think that's all connected. So those are closing words from me on that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Becca, for joining us today. We sure enjoyed our visit, and thanks again for all that you do.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, will you help us reach more people by subscribing, sharing the podcast with a friend, and leaving a 5-star review? If you've been inspired by what you've heard today and want to learn more of how you can make a difference for kids in foster care and the foster families where you live, visit americaskidsbelong.org. We depend on individual donors to fund our work. We'd be grateful if you would consider joining us as a monthly donor. Visit americaskidsbelong.org to make your tax-deductible donation. Thank you. Together, we can ensure a family for every child in foster care and a foster-friendly community to ensure every foster family feels loved and supported.